right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first of two portfolio showcase events. My name is Bianca Riello, and I support the network and partnerships on the CTIP team. My background is in bioengineering, and as a former medical device founder, I'm incredibly honored to be a part of the CTIP mission and under the incredible leadership of Dr. Juan Espinoza. CTIP is really anchored by an incredible ecosystem of partners and collaborators across the US, really with this mission to support pediatric medical device commercialization. And today we have two spotlight sessions. As a whole, we support well over 100 pediatric medical devices out in the ecosystem from concept to commercialization, really in an effort to reduce this valley of death that Juan, so adequately defined. So for today's event, I'm really excited to welcome three specific companies for the first showcase. We will walk through each of their company pitches and then get through a fun panel of Q&A at the end. But really this represents a range of the diversity of companies that we support across the pediatric specialties. So without further ado, I'd like to first introduce Annalisa Samara, CEO of Rhaeos.
Thank you so much, Bianca. So I'm CEO of Rhaeos, and Rhaeos is developing this wearable skin sensor that you see on the screen, and I have it here in my hand. And what it can do is detect bodily fluid flow beneath the surface of the skin. So when I say bodily fluid, think of things like blood, lymph, that sort of thing. But in the case of our first indication, we're detecting cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, in shunted hydrocephalus patients. Hydrocephalus is characterized by excess fluid on the brain. About 1 million Americans have it, and you're either born with it or you acquire it later in life. But whatever the case may be, there's no cure for it. And the standard treatment for hydrocephalus is through the placement of something called the shunt, which is a tubing that drains the brain of that excess fluid. So on the proximal end, it starts in the ventricle, makes its way down the neck and into the abdomen where it drains. Shunt technology has been around for over 50 years. And the problem with shunts is that they fail. So it's not a matter of if, but really a matter of when. And when this happens, it's really due to infection, obstruction, dislodgement, that sort of thing. And when that happens, a new shunt needs to be placed. So it's not uncommon for, kids to have more shunt surgeries, unfortunately, rather than birthdays. Equally difficult to stomach is the fact that diagnosing shunt failure can be difficult. So patients can exhibit nonspecific symptoms like headaches, dizziness, and nausea, and current diagnostic modalities are inefficient. They don't really give you information directly about the flow, and what exists today is primarily imaging and some invasive means through shunt taps. So Rhaeos is addressing this unmet medical need through FlowSense. So what FlowSense is a non-invasive wearable skin sensor that you see here. Kind of looks like a bumpy bandage, but inside are sophisticated electronics that in about 7 minutes, non-invasively and wirelessly, we can detect the flow as well as the flow rate of the CSF. And how it works is that we place it on the skin over the shunt. We deliver a little bit of heat to the skin surface. And if there's flow within the shunt, that heat dissipates in the direction of flow. That information is sent via Bluetooth chip to a mobile app and processes the data. We are developing a suite of technologies starting in the hospital first for that rapid spot check of flow. We're expecting de novo 510(k) approval next month, and we're continuing that work for a continuous monitoring device at home. We've talked with many different stakeholders, and the benefits of our technologies are many, including a potential reduction in ER visits, radiation exposure, and more. Now, in terms of traction, we have used FlowSense in over 300 patients across the country, coast to coast, UCS to Duke, including this wonderful institution called Lurie. Here's a snapshot of those hospitals that we've worked with and continue to work with. And here's my favorite slide. Here's a slide on a number of our patients across the country, from preemies all the way to seniors. Now, in terms of regulatory, we are de novo 510(k). We have received breakthrough designation, have had a number of meetings with the FDA, and as I mentioned, are expecting approval next month. In terms of IP, we have 4 issued patents and have a clear freedom to operate, and we own the thermal flow sense space, so beyond CSF flow. In terms of financing, Rhaeos has been fortunate to receive over $20 million of financing. A huge chunk of that comes non-dilutively, primarily through the NIH and NSF, as well as MedTech Innovator. So we're starting with hydrocephalus, but we're by no means stopping there. We already have published clinical data in other areas of flow and are slowly launching out those products. In terms of the Rhaeos team, we have significant medical device commercialization experience. Many of our team members have led startup companies and also have significant industry experience. We've brought devices through the FDA regulatory process and also have multiple exits under our belt. Here's a snapshot of our clinical investigators from coast to coast. And we are also very grateful to have CTIP support. We've been working with CTIP over the past few years, and we were fortunate last year to receive a Catalyzing Pediatric Innovation Grant, which actually funded our usability study that we submitted to the FDA last year. So in terms of a call to action, we love doing clinical studies, not only for hydrocephalus, but for our other indications as well. Like I mentioned, we are working coast to coast and are eagerly seeking additional partners who are interested in working with our non-invasive wearable. We're also interested in working with experts to conduct health economic outcomes research. And we're also hiring. We are outgrowing our lab space and looking to bring on more talents from engineers and more. So thank you so much. I'll be around if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annalisa. Next, I would like to welcome Jared Kling, Executive Advisor for Atrility Medical.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jared Kling. I'm with Atrility Medical. We're based out of Madison, Wisconsin, and we're excited to be here. A little bit about Atrility. Atrility is a medical device company that focuses on helping clinicians know the heart rhythm at all times. So the problem that we ultimately solve is pediatrics and our babies, they have really fast heart rhythms that maybe aren't as strong as adults. And so the challenge that that creates is at times for a clinician at the bedside, it's harder to see their rhythm from an atrial signal perspective on the monitor and the existing bedside monitors as clearly as they might need to. And so the reason that that's important is depending on what you see on that monitor or don't see on that monitor, you might lead to a different diagnosis or a different course of action, which can make a big difference on that baby's life. So the solution that we have, our solution was created by a pediatric electrophysiologist based out of UW in Madison, Wisconsin. And after traveling around the country and Wisconsin and helping people to work on these different diagnoses, thought, you know what, I want to find a way that I can make it easier for those clinicians at the bedside to know exactly what is going on. If you're trained, it's hard to see. And if you're not trained, it's nearly impossible at times. And so the solution that he came up with and invented is the blue box you see in the middle right of the screen. We call that the Atriamp. And the Atriamp, what it does simply is it amplifies the atrial signal from the atrial wires that are placed on a patient post cardiac surgery and puts it on a monitor so that it is amplified again to be able to see what's going on. And it provides a continuous atrial signal, which can make a big difference versus kind of the current solutions that are in place, which would be kind of your traditional ECG, which will give you a snapshot in time, right? So you can do that, you can get a 10-second readout. But if something is happening with that rhythm outside of that time where you're actively taking that read, you may not see it. And so the difference here is pretty clear, I think, when you see those side by side. So the top, for example, would be the surface ECG that you see. You saw that on the other screen as well. And even to the trained eye, again, you might go right up next to the screen and you need to be able to see what's going on with those atrial signals or P waves to be able to diagnose, is this a normal rhythm? Is it AFib, fib? Is it something else? And so the Atriamp signal is on the bottom. And that's what you see. And that's what's come across in the monitor. And from that, most people with any kind of a trained eye will say, that's AFib immediately. And we need to take a certain course of action to be able to do that. The beauty of the Atriamp and the feedback that we get from organizations that use it is ultimately that there is no change to their workflow. Today, it integrates right in their workflow. We connect to the atrial wires that are placed already, and we tap into the monitor that exists. We are a commercial organization. We are FDA cleared. We are used at about 25 different organizations across the US already. Again, we've started on the pediatric side, so that sounds a little more rare based on what Yuan said earlier today, and we have a few others that are actively in trial. For kind of the company milestones and call to action, we were invented in around 2018. We went to market commercially for the first time in 2022, so we've been out in the world for just under 2 years. And where we could use maybe some help from this group, if you have the ability to, is we are planning to do a fundraise in Q4 of this year, or kick that off, about a $5 million round. The reason for that ultimately is we started with pediatrics. We see enormous reception to that. We want to expand that here in the US, but we've also found that this product and solution works for adults as well with atrial wires that are placed. Mass General is our first adult organization planning to use this. They're actively in a trial that kicked off 2 weeks ago, and they see this valuable enough that they plan, hopefully, to use it on every single adult patient that they place these wires on. Beyond that, we're also looking for any introductions. I think as many of the folks in this room typically encounter, we don't do a lot of social media marketing. That doesn't tend to get very far with the exact people who this relates to. So for us, it's a present at a conference or a warm introduction that makes a big difference to some of the roles that are here, both in the pediatric and adult world. So thank you for your time. We're excited to see you at our table out front, myself or my colleague, Matt, and we'd be happy to show you what it looks like. You'll see the cute little baby on our table out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Ajay Howday, CEO and co-founder of Annoviant.
I do have an advantage of having smaller height. So good afternoon. So my name is Ajay Howday. So thank you so much, CTIP, and thank you all for staying in this session and listening to my story here. So I'm co-founder and CEO of Annoviant. The company is actually based in Atlanta, Georgia. We do have a facility here in South Carolina, and we are currently focused on helping restore broken or damaged hearts. Many of you probably know there are about 40,000 children born every year. And this little tiny machine in your body, it does beat about 1,000 times, 100,000 times a day. It pumps about 2,000 gallons of blood into the entire body. Unfortunately, some of the children are not fortunate. They have some defective part in their heart. And there are about 15 or so defects that one or other children could be born with, and they all need to be fixed. There are about 8.5 million people living today, adults, with some heart wall defect, and it's costing billions of dollars. So what are they doing today is that basically there are two types of product. One is mechanical device that's being used mostly for the adults. It's not at all for the children. But bioprosthetic heart walls that are actually faced for the pediatric, all of this technology or material that you see on the slide here, they all made with a xenograft that is cross-linked with the glutaraldehyde and made into form of different shapes and sizes that you see. The only one that you see in the middle, that's 2003, that introduced in the market, was designed for the pediatric. Otherwise, all the devices were or meant for the adults. So what's happening today? So the technology has not changed in the last 60 years. It's the same technology. People have reported multiple issues, predominantly calcification, infection, thrombosis. And the biggest of all, when it comes to pediatric, once the device is implanted, that device does not grow. So as a result, children have to go through multiple surgeries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, eventually heart transplant. You can imagine it is costing millions of dollars, or billions of dollars. And it is very hard for the pediatric patient to see that scenario. We have a technology. It's the same thing. We're starting with a xenograft. We take out all the animal cells. We treat with a secret sauce to make it compatible to the body to overcome the challenges that we have seen in the marketplace, i.e. calcification. And predominantly what they also recently published is that the devices that they're currently using, they do degenerate much faster in the pediatric. And we have the data that we show that we can make it functional and it can last longer. So for the last 5 years, we are laser focused on the first product. So I do have the device. I'll be happy to show you outside if you guys want to see it. So it's a device that goes from the right ventricle outflow tract, from the heart to the lung that is pushing the blood out. So we have done a couple of preclinical trials. I will explain in a more detail. We have made the device into the commercial setting. We implanted those into the growing lamb model. And we have seen it is biocompatible. It does grow. There's no calcification, no infection. And it's the same technology. We can use it for other applications as well, as I mentioned. We have confirmed the safety and efficacy. As a startup company, like any other company, we are always looking at as to what are the major risks and how we can mitigate or minimize. And there are various areas that CTIP has helped us, specifically one about the reimbursement. That's one of the questions that comes up. How about the FDA? So we got support from other pediatric device consortiums. So constantly we're looking at each and every aspect and making sure that we are minimizing, mitigating the risk. We have a great team. Many of the people come from the industry experience. We have several academicians who have been working in the heart wall or the cardiovascular area. We also have several clinicians who are actually worked in the pediatric and they have been helping us. We have great board of advisors. They're always making sure that we are on the right track. I cannot be thankful. We cannot do as a startup company alone. Yes, funding is important, but the support that we have been receiving from the hospital to the academics to the vendor that we've been working with. And you see at the bottom, we're also getting support from 3 of the 5 pediatric device consortium, which is priceless. As I mentioned, so we are laser focused on the first product, but in the meantime, we also have tested the same technology on making the leaflet patch for the aortic wall. We can say take the same technology. We're also looking into making the small vascular graft that can be needed for the pediatric patient or maybe even the adults. So in summary, I believe that we have the best technology, promising technology. We have reproducible preclinical results. We have a great team. Obviously, we can take more support. But more than anything, I believe that we have good traction. So far, we have raised $7.5 million. Most of it is non-dilutive funding. We also had pre-sub discussion with the FDA, and we have the preclinical results that are reproducible. What I'm looking for, like any other company, obviously funding is important, but for now, if you ask me at what I need, as we are working towards getting the FDA approval, we are looking into seeking some help in getting prepared for the first in human. And I believe ultimately to get it to the market, to get it accepted, we cannot do it on our own. So we believe that some big company, one of the 4 companies, would come and acquire us and maybe take it to the mass market. So with that, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite both other speaker representatives to the front so we can begin our Q&A. We'll have the baby stand. All right, so bridging from the last conversation, last panel, really around pediatric patients specifically and then their voice being heard, I would love for each of you to address how your product directly is built with pediatric patients in mind and really what unique product characteristics in general, how you're addressing pediatric patients in your design and delivery process. So I will start with you, Jared.
As I mentioned, we really were purpose-built for pediatrics initially, which again, I think just different than most companies because of our tie to the person who founded it or started and invented the device, pediatric electrophysiologist. So we hone that, we make it incredibly simple, safe, we've tested it, and that's where it is used today and ultimately where it is honed to be able to amplify those signals and I think adds the most value.
Thank you. So Rhaeos is initially focusing on hydrocephalus, and hydrocephalus is almost the #1 reason for brain surgery in children. So we are addressing a significant unmet need in helping to, diagnose, whether or not there's a shunt failure and hopefully, giving parents ease of mind.
think from an Annoviant perspective, so the first product that you're seeing here is actually meant for the pediatric patients. I just talked about only 40,000 children that are born every year. But remember, there's about 1.4 million pediatric patients who have had congenital heart disease. They have gone through one round of treatment, maybe two rounds of treatment. They can also benefit from this one particular device, but also some other devices that we can create for those pediatric patients that are suffering with a congenital heart disease.
Thank you. You can actually maintain the mic. As far as, considering the technical complexity of the devices that you are building, can you speak to your clinical validation and how that's contributed to really where you are today?
Great question. I think before I go to the clinical validation, I want to talk about commercialization to some extent, right? So one is to have a design in your mind or technology in mind that is specific for the pediatric. Can you really make it scalable? And for us, I think, we can readily get the raw material. For example, in this case, we are taking the bovine jugular vein. We can get in different shapes. It has outside conduit, but also it has a leaflet that you need for blood to function going up and down. So we needed to make sure that we can really take it from the laboratory to scale up and make sure we can control the quality. When it comes to preclinical, so as I mentioned in my presentation, we have first implanted that into small animal models, taken into the growing lamb model, and we tested 2 time intervals at 2 different locations to show that it is biocompatible, it is safe, and also it is functioning the way it is supposed to function. And also it overcomes the clinical challenges. And the biggest part that I missed mentioning is that it actually allows the host cells to come and reimpregnate or regenerate the whole tissue. So that's the beauty. So we tested 2 times. And also, as I mentioned, so the leaflet, we also put it in the different area, and the aortic side also in the preclinical setting.
I think we can all agree that clinical data matters, especially in the pediatric population. As a mother of 2 myself, if a new technology was being introduced to me, I want to make sure that there's a lot of clinical data behind that. So Rhaeos has used our device in over 300 babies, to date. And we're just, scaling across and working with more pediatric hospitals.
We benefited from the exact signals and patterns and rhythms that we are amplifying. There's about 50 years of data on that via kind of 12 lead EKGs and things like that we're just ultimately amplifying. So we just had a lot of depth for clinical validation and allowed us to be able to move through that process relatively quickly compared to bringing something entirely net new to the market.
Thank you so much. And obviously this clinical validation is a key part of your regulatory pathway. So just, quickly highlighting a little bit of that, I think starting with you, Annalise, I know, congratulations on the breakthrough designation. Would you speak to, your regulatory path and how that's been supported?
Sure, thank you. So we're de novo 510K. As you mentioned, we are FDA breakthrough designated, and we took advantage of that designation by having over 6 meetings with the FDA. Hopefully we're best friends by now. And but all of that enabled us to have good interactions and enabled us to test our device at 9 centers, coast to coast, and knock on wood, think of me over the next few weeks for upcoming approval.
All right. Anything to add, either of you?
So I have been in healthcare for the last 25 years. Leanne, I think you know that. Taking my prior experience, having frequent and right from the beginning discussions with FDA is extremely important. We were lucky to have the very first meeting with FDA back in 2019. And I want to give a kudos to the PPDC, Pediatric Device Consortium in Pennsylvania. So they enabled the initial conversation. That is where we started working on, so what's the predicate device and what do we need to do? And in 2020, we received humanitarian use device designation, and thanks to, again, PPDC and other people. So we've been really, to your point, ongoing conversations with FDA and making sure that if there is no current clear directives, specifically when it comes to cardiovascular, ISO 5840 is actually designed for the adult heart valve. It is not for the pediatric. So on a couple of occasions, we have to educate them as to why it is not suitable for the pediatric, as an example. So in the recent conversation that we had, a pre-sub discussion in August, we told them that we cannot possibly test this one in vitro. It has to be in vivo, for example, for making sure that the leaflet function up to 50 million cycle. I cannot put it in the water and make sure it function up to 20 million cycle. So they're very open, they're very open to make some changes and all. So coming back to the question, I think often early enough conversation with FDA is extremely important, and they have been very, very receptive for having more conversation and giving some feedback.
Thank you so much. That concludes this first session. So I encourage you all to ask questions of our speakers and our companies here today, as well as the others that we have joining us. So thank you all. We'll move on to our next panel.